And we now recall clause number 21-38410, the state of Francis versus Clayton Bernard Foreman. The defendant is present with his attorney and the state's attorneys. Everybody ready to proceed? When we rested yesterday, Ms. Dean was taking the stand and testifying. She is on the witness stand at this time. I asked the bailiff to brief forth the jury. Thank you. And the record shall show that the jury is seated in the courtroom. Good morning to all of you. I think we are ready to proceed. And I believe the defense was about to cross-examine Ms. Dean, and you may go forward.
Here, please, court counselors. Ms. Dean, I have some questions for you. Is it safe to say that you became probably involved in this case somewhere in 2021?
Yes, sir.
And other people in your lab or BPS lab, either Austin or I don't think it was Houston. I think it was Casey or Cassie. Somebody, was that out of Austin?
I believe there was some work done in Austin.
Were you the only one in Houston to do any work on this case?
Yes, sir, I was.
When you got or you received the information, items were brought to you, you were given a synopsis of what was going on, correct?
Brief synopsis, yes, sir.
And would you agree with me that the majority of the synopsis came from Detective Llewellyn of the Beaumont Police Department?
And Ranger Best as well, yes, sir.
And as a lab, do you usually only do what you're requested to do? Do you understand that question?
I do. And yes, typically we base our analysis on the request that's made by law enforcement with the information we have about the case.
And in simple terms is, I have this object, I have this possible contributor, see if you can match it
That's correct.
through DNA. And that's basically what you do, is just DNA, right?
Yes, sir.
There are two types of DNA. There, you kept on saying sperm. What was that? The samples?
So a couple of the items of evidence, we did a special extraction so that there was a sperm cell fraction and an epithelial cell fraction for those items of evidence.
Is that kind of like the sperm cell? Is that kind of like a catch-all phrase now? Because there's other DNA involved in that, right?
There could potentially be other types of DNA in the sperm cell fraction. There could also be other types of DNA in the epithelial cell fraction. Yeah, that's totally possible.
And when you analyze something like that, especially in the sperm cell, do you try to find the other DNA that's present?
Yes, when an extraction occurs, there's no way to differentiate like this DNA came from a sperm cell and this DNA came from an epithelial cell. It all commingles together.
You would agree with me, yeah, not, that technology has advanced greatly from when this offense occurred in 1995 until you did your test up until 2023. I think it was June of 2023 or July.
Yes,
Correct? And in a way, we've heard testimony that the samples have gotten smaller that you can analyze.
that's correct.
The sensitivity has gotten greater
Yes, it has.
from your amplifications and stuff that you use now to try to determine, correct?
Yes, sir.
But it's only as good as the evidence that you receive, correct?
That's true. Yes,
And would you agree with me? You're only here to testify what you were instructed to do with these samples.
that is correct.
You didn't go off somewhere else to determine anything else except what you were told to do.
That is correct.
Okay. I want to go to your report, which is April 30th of 2020, which I believe has been entered in as exhibit. Number 156, State's Exhibit 156. Do you have that with you?
Yes, sir, I do.
Kind of went over that. The state did have some questions. Now, when you received the evidence, you received swabs from a vaginal swab, correct?
Yes,
An anal swab
at a later date, I did. Yes.
at a later date. And what else did you receive on April 30th?
The report of April 30th reflects the evidence that I had received previous to this date, which was the cutting from the comforter, the vaginal swabs, and then several items from a trash tool that were to be used as alternate reference samples.
Okay. After you did your results, and that's the numbers that we saw, and I don't know what exhibit was, in reference to the cutting from the comforter, that's like 96.1 septillion, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then the epiphilia from the comforter, what did you say, 2.49 septillion, septillion?
Septillion, yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Awful big numbers, right? The question that I have though is, I want to get the page. Show you on page 2 of 3. Oh, I'll read. I didn't know it was so good on TV. Sample 0101 AB. That's DNA extract from where?
The epithelial cell fraction of the vaginal swabs.
From Mary Catherine Edwards.
That's correct.
So you had a DNA profile there that you discovered,
Yes, I did.
and you tested it with a known suspect. Well, what, two? You had two known contributors, correct? You had one from, let's say, Mary Catherine Edwards through the blood, correct?
At this point in my analysis, I did not.
You didn't have the blood?
Not at this point.
Okay.
That came later. I issued a report in July of 2021, and that's when I received her known sample.
Okay.
And his buccal swabs.
Okay.
So at this point in my analysis, no, sir, all I had was an alternate reference sample to be used as a known for Clayton Foreman.
But it was enough to exclude, the DNA profile was enough to just exclude Clayton Foreman, correct?
That is correct, from that sample, yes, sir.
But it was also enough DNA to know that the other contributor was a male contributor, correct?
That is correct.
Were you ever asked to try to find out who that other male contributor was?
There was no way to know who that other male contributor was, because the only indication that we had, everything else looked single source, like one contributor, except at the amylogenin locus, where when there's a female, you're only gonna have one X peak. When it's male, you have an X and a Y, and there was a very small Y peak. There was absolutely no other information throughout the profile that I would be able to compare to anybody. You could submit all the knowns in the world and no comparisons would just be able to be made. There was just two.
That isn't what I asked.
Okay.
The question was, were you ever asked to try to find the male contributor? Because you stated that it was enough to do a DNA profile. Okay, so you had enough for a DNA profile, but were you ever asked to try to find out who that male contributor was?
I was asked to compare it to the one known male profile that I had.
But no others.
Correct.
Okay. And that was on state's exhibit number 156, correct?
I don't have the state
Oh.
numbers.
That was the April 30th of 21.
Yes.
So after that, I believe the next report is July 8th of 21, correct?
That is correct.
Now, if Mr. Foreman was arrested April 29th of 21, April 30th would have been after that, right? That's the last report. That's the day after the 29th, right? That's the report we just talked about.
That's correct.
Okay. The next report now is July 8th of 21, correct?
That's correct.
And what were you asked to do there?
At this point, I had received a blood sample from Mary Catherine Edwards and the buccal swabs from Clayton Foreman.
Okay,
So my report dated July 8th of 2021 indicates that a blood stain card was made from the whole blood and collected and prepared for DNA analysis, and that the buccal swabs from Clayton Foreman were collected and prepared for DNA analysis.
okay. And that's all it was collected. You just made reference that you received it and then you made ready to go test it.
Yes.
And that's the only thing you did on July 8th. Okay. And then on August 31st of 2021, which would have been State's Exhibit 157.
Yeah.
What did you do there?
That was where I had developed genetic profiles from Mary Catherine Edwards' blood sample and the buccal swabs from Clayton Foreman. And then I ran comparisons and statistical analysis on the DNA extracts from the vaginal swabs and from the comforter setting.
So now you've got the comforter setting and the vaginal swabs. And did they compare?
I performed comparisons, yes.
And I guess you testified to that.
Yes, sir.
Question I have is, when were those, I don't know what the word I want to use, sample or the semen? What date did you determine that the semen was placed on the comforter?
Oh, I wouldn't know the date that the semen was placed on the comforter.
How about any type of date? I mean, how long could that be on a comforter?
Biological material, if stored in proper conditions, can last for decades.
So there is no time of when that possibly, that, and I'm talking about the comforter only, okay? Because a body fluid is different. Would you agree with me? I mean, it could be.
Well, semen is a body fluid.
Yeah, but I'm talking about placement and when.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Bear with me.
No.
Okay. But on a comforter or a piece of clothing, any type of semen or any type of blood, you can't say when that was actually put on or that was deposited on that piece of or that item.
No, I cannot.
And it could be preserved, as you said, for decades or for whenever. Right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. As I was preparing for trial, I was reading, and the next question I have is, there's testimony in reference to semen that was detected in the vaginal area and the anal area. As you testified to, you had vaginal swabs and anal swabs. And when would that have been? Can you just determine when that could have been deposited?
No,
or
I
happened?
cannot.
Is there a time frame or anything on that, or does it really matter? Or does that not matter, but that's the wrong word, but can it be determined?
It cannot be determined. Literature has shown that semen survives in orifice, vaginal anal orifice for anywhere up to from 96 hours. And we've seen it as up to about 6 or 7 days.
Yeah, and would you agree that I've read anywhere from 6 to 10 days, and I guess that kind of fits, doesn't it, with what you testified to?
Yes, sir.
So that could have been deposited anywhere between the date of the occurrence, but could have been 6 to 9 days or so back. Could have been.
Could have been.
Okay. Or further, but usually the general principle is it could be back that far, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you could not determine when that was actually deposited.
No, I cannot.
Later on in July of 2023, I guess in preparation of trial, you were asked now to analyze some more items, correct? And it's the July 25th to 2023, which is one of these. And were you given an anal swab box and with wooden sticks, left hand fingernail clippings or scrapings, and right hand fingernail scrapings and clippings and anal swabs?
Yes, I was.
Okay. And was that given to you by Aaron Llewellyn? And I guess it also came from the Austin lab too, correct?
It did. The items were delivered by Aaron Llewellyn to our laboratory.
Before we get into your analysis, when DNA started, what's an allele?
An allele?
I'm from the Northeast. That's how I say it, but
An allele is simply a genetic marker. It's a certain area, location along a chromosome.
and is that what you use in order to identify possible who it may be from the DNA?
Yes, sir.
And when it first started back in, I don't know, 95, 87, I guess, it started to become prevalent. How many did they use in order to identify usually? I heard 4 or 5. I'm not trying to trick you. I heard about 4 or 5 they used.
Yes, the kids were much, much smaller and they started by just looking at a couple of locations when it first started.
And over the time and through your experience, that has become greater and greater. And I think, what did you testify yesterday to that you all used? 20, 30,
23.
23 now.
Yes, sir.
And that progressed over the years through. And why did it go from like 4 or 5 to 23?
We want to be confident of the matches that we make. So the more information we have, the better the probability that we are going to make a correct association.
Analia. Did I say it right?
It's good.
Okay. I don't want to be drummed out of the state. Are there common ones between human beings?
Yes.
And how many common ones? Just, and it's not specific, but typically.
I know in the kit we use, there are probably 3 or 4 that we know. We're going to be making some repetitive alleles between individuals. So they're not maybe our go-to location to look at.
Okay. And in reference to the anal swabs and your examination of it, how many alleles did you actually determine there was?
I was able to obtain a complete profile, so I had information in all locations.
Well, you have your report that says resolve more DNA mixtures. I think it was a kind of like a case study, a summary of inputs. Can I show you something that?
That's my Starbucks file, yes.
That's. I'm looking at.
I know that I have all of those. Typically, if I need to refer to all the pages, I might need to open my computer for the full page file. I do have a couple of the pages for each one. Yes, yes, sir. The anal, the sperm cell fraction from the anal. Okay, yes, sir, I do have that.
And I look at the summary. And I see a lot of zeros and I see some numbers on the right-hand column.
Yes.
And what does that column represent, the contributor number 2?
So that column represents the possible allele that the second contributor is donating to that genetic profile.
Okay. The first contributor would probably be Catherine Edwards, correct?
Yes, sir, it was.
In order that we can talk about it a little bit more, I'm gonna show you appendix number 5, which I believe is your report. Do you recognize that?
I do,
Okay, and is that a report that you generated?
yes,
Does it look fairly, does it look accurate from the time you generated that report?
yes, it does.
Any deletions or modifications that was done after you prepared it?
I don't believe so, no.
You were the author of those numbers.
I was.
This time, Your Honor, I tendered appendix exhibit number 5. Purpose of the court. May I hear from you?
No objection to 5.
It's admitted.
I want to go back to page 11. Let's see. In the left-hand corner, it says locus, correct?
Yes,
What is that?
those are the areas of the DNA, the locations along the DNA that we looked at and we analyzed.
Are those alleles?
No, the numbers are the alleles.
Huh?
The numbers are the alleles,
Alleles,
yes,
okay. So that's what I'm saying is that the alleles that you used, right?
correct.
Okay. And contributor number 1 appears to be from unknowns. Was that Mary Catherine Edwards?
Yes.
Contributor 1, okay. And this is the anal swabs.
The sperm cell fraction of the anal swab.
Anal swabs. And on the other one, I see the first one, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see numbers only on 5 of the alleles. Is that
5
correct?
locations.
On the right hand one going down?
Yes,
So you only got matches on the anal swab with 5
Correct.
alleles.
yes,
And it's common now for people to have 4 to 5 or 3 to 4 common alleles, correct?
there are locations, some of those locations that we look at, there are common alleles between individuals.
Okay. And you now use 23 to be more accurate or to get certain. I think you testified to that, right?
Yes, sir.
So to reliability. Again, I asked you, you were only given 2 contributors to analyze during your testing, correct?
I was given known reference
No.
tables from 2 individuals.
Right, and that was
Yes,
Edwards and Foreman.
That's correct.
Okay. In the anal box. Remember testifying to that?
I do,
There was an unknown contributor, correct?
that's correct.
There was a DNA profile, correct, that you knew of. I mean, another DNA profile of an unknown male.
Yes,
You had Clayton Foreman. And you had, well, that's the only other male contributor or known contributor that you had, correct?
I had only male profile I had for comparison, yes.
Did you ever get any other sample to test?
Any other male individuals?
Yes.
For comparison, no, I did not.
And just give me a second. We've got a lot of reports here. And you made reference there that you think it was contaminated, or did you? Is that what you said?
I said that was one explanation for how there is a male DNA that I can't identify. I don't know that that's what happened. There's a various sundry of reasons of what could happen. That's just one possibility.
It could be someone else's DNA there.
There's absolutely somebody else's DNA there.
Right. I mean, we've heard testimony from Selmart. You've heard of Selmart before, right?
I have.
Have you heard of Miss Webster before?
I think, no, I have not.
That did the testing? I think she went by somebody else's name or has another name. But you've used their results sometimes, right? To try to get a basis to redo.
No, we can't use other people's results.
Okay. And I show you the July 25th of 23. Result. You have two reports on that, correct? But this is the supplemental report, which is State's Exhibit number 158. Talking specifically at this point, this right here. Again, in 2001, you had another DNA profile, right, from a test you did.
In 2001,
Yes.
I didn't test anything in 2001.
But didn't we just talk about a test? And April 30th, was it?
In 2021?
21.
Yes,
Yeah, it's 2021.
Yeah.
And now in July 25th of 2023, is that the same DNA profile that you retested that you think is in the 2021 test? On the anal swab?
I don't think I'm understanding your question.
Well, and I'm not trying to figure, I'm trying.
No, I know.
Here is April 30th of 2021, which is State's Exhibit 156. Okay. And it was excluded from the vaginal swabs. A DNA profile from the vaginal swabs, correct?
From the epithelial cell fraction, he's excluded, that's correct.
And there really isn't, or there may not be a difference between sperm and epithelial, correct? It depends on the DNA sample.
It does depend on the DNA sample and it depends on the extraction method.
Right. I mean, but when you're talking about two different types of samples, it's really, it's about the same, and it's all based on the amount of sample or what you have to test. Am I saying that right? You could have just as good epithelial as you do sperm and get a good result, right?
Yes,
Okay. Well, now this is you've got a DNA profile on a vaginal swab from someone, another male. And now you have a DNA profile from the anal box and sticks. That Clayton Foreman's been excluded. So that's two different locations now.
yes, he was excluded from those two items of evidence, yes.
Right. But I'm talking about one was vaginal, one was anal.
So this is the box and the sticks from the anal swabs, not the anal swabs themselves.
I understand, but it's in the same box where the anal swabs were, right?
I don't know, I never saw the anal swabs in that box, I would assume so.
Well, when they packaged them, and if there was testimony that they boxed them and everyone was wearing gloves and they boxed them up, you didn't see any other boxes that said anal swabs, right?
No, I did
You only
not.
saw one.
That's correct.
Okay, so you assume that there was only one and there's nothing in any records that you've seen, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And if everybody said they were real careful and they were clean and they wore gloves and they separated them, only did one at a time because you have to preserve whatever with their protocols and regulations. This had to come from somewhere, right? But you would agree with me that it's two separate locations.
Yes,
And at any time where you requested now the anal and vagina to try to determine who the other male contributor was.
no,
And there again, you can't tell the time frame of when those were deposited.
that's correct, I did not.
I want to now go to the fingernail clippings. Okay. And what report was that?
That's also the July 25th report.
The supplemental report, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this is, I'm showing you again, State's Exhibit number 158. Okay. And is that your report?
It is.
Okay. Now, under the fingernail clippings of the left fingernail, you said it was a mixture of two individuals with Mary Catherine Edwards as an assumed contributor because you had a known sample or a known contributor, Edwards, right?
That's correct.
You also had Clayton Foreman's DNA at that time, a known contributor,
A known sample, yes.
sample,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And he's excluded,
He is.
and nothing on the left fingernail was detected.
DNA was detected
Okay,
on the left fingernails.
okay, and
Clayton Foreman is excluded as a contributor to that profile.
if you take your report, I'll show you. A comparison. Let me see where it is. Bear with me.
Yes.
I received this report with your name on it. You familiar with that?
Yes.
I wanna talk about this.
Okay.
And
Okay.
do you have that copy with you?
I don't think I do have that with me.
I do have a plain copy.
Yes, I do have it with me.
What is a result table that you prepared? Results table. Let me go look at it, because that's what it's got.
So
What is
So this results table is the second step of the DNA process where we're quantifying the DNA to determine how much we have. And this is a printout of our values.
how much you have? What does that mean?
Ultimately, how much DNA we were able to obtain during our extraction process.
And did you prepare those numbers? For your testing,
Yes,
through your machine? You put the input in or whatever you had, and they come out with those numbers, right?
that is correct.
Okay, and you use that in comparisons and to do your evaluations.
That is correct.
Anything about that that would cause you to say that it was modified?
There's a little bit of writing in the margins, but other than that, yeah.
I think that may be my writing about this. It seems why I'm getting a quarter copy. I'll show you what has been marked as defendant's exhibit number 6. It's just part of what these are. And I believe I showed you page 5 and page 5.
Yes.
Well, I have 2 files.
They may be from two different runs.
You have both of these runs, yes. Because one of them has to do with the anal swabs, the other one has to do with the fingernail. Are they both included in defendant 6?
No, that one, this one is not included in defendant 6.
You have the other one, I couldn't copy. The, this report has to do with fingernail, and you're saying there's another one for the.
So this one has to do with the fingernails and the sticks and box.
Okay.
That one has to do with the actual anal swabs themselves.
And you've got that, that's a separate report.
Yes, sir.
The other clean copy. Along with number 6, I show you what has been marked as defendants number 7. And we recognize and we talked about this a little bit. This is the anal swab itself, right?
Yes, it is.
This time, Your Honor, I tender defendant exhibit 6 and 7, subject to any objections by this.
No objection to 6 and 7.
They're admitted.
I show you on the here, and I'm going to defendant 6, which I believe is no, number 7. I'm sorry. Is the anal. Okay.
Okay,
When I was going through this, I want to direct your attention to this section right here. Okay, these
Yeah.
threes. What is that? A sample of?
so that is a sample of the sperm cell fraction from the anal swabs.
Now, that's not the anal box, that's the anal swab.
Correct.
Correct, and there's a difference, right?
Yes,
And we talked about it, you talked about it a little bit, that's the quantity, correct?
that's correct.
Okay, and that number is 0.25 and 0.02, right?
Yes,
0.02, it has male. What is that? Dual male, B3. What is that?
so we have the capability to estimate the amount of total human DNA in our sample and the amount of just male DNA in our sample. So that's what those two numbers represent.
So that's 0.02, right?
That's correct for male.
Okay. Now I want to go over, because we're now talking about that you got fingernail samples, right? And I show you defendants number 6. Similar, is it not?
I'm sorry?
It's similar. I mean, the testing is similar to defendant 7, which is the anal. It's the same printout, but different number.
That's correct.
Okay. It appears from that you have more of a sample underneath the fingernails, the left fingernails, than you do on the anal swab. Not the box or anything, but the anal swab, correct?
That's correct.
0.48 and 0.25 on the total, 0.02 on just the male from the swab. And you have a 0.032, that's more than on the anal, correct?
That is correct.
And that's a DNA profile, is it not?
That's the quantity of DNA in the sample.
In the sample. Okay, so you have more, you agree with me, more of a substance, and I'm using common words, on the fingernails than you do even on the anal, correct?
Yes, our system showed more DNA in the sample from the left-hand fingernail scrapings than from the anal swabs.
I had defendant's number, there it is. Now, your testing was on the left-hand side of the fingernails, correct?
Yes, and I also had a sample from the right hand.
Okay. And what did you? That's bad, no, that's not it. What did you determine from the right hand clippings?
The DNA profile from this item is consistent with the DNA profile for Mary Catherine Edwards.
And that's from the right hand?
Yes,
Was there anything else that you saw from there? In reference to DNA?
no, what I saw is it was a single profile and it was consistent with Mary Catherine Edwards.
I want to direct your attention to defendant's number 4, which is a test was entered into, was a report of a laboratory examination, December 31st of 1997. part of that testing. Was from the right hand. Okay. Hold on, man, let me. Right hand fingernail clippings. It said. There's a gentleman's name by the name of Glenn C. Hansen that cannot be excluded as a source of the sperm DNA underneath those right hand clippings. Are you saying, right fingernail clippings, are you saying when you tested it in 2023, you couldn't find any DNA?
I found DNA, but it was consistent with Mary Catherine Edwards.
And nothing, nobody else?
That's correct.
And you would agree probably Glenn C. Hansen is a male?
Probably.
It actually says it's sperm DNA excluded as donors. Cannot be excluded. So you only found Mary Catherine's on the right hand side of the fingernail clippings. Selmark found somebody that couldn't be excluded back in '97, correct?
If that's what the report says, yes.
I mean, you could look at it if you want, but okay. And then come July of 23, you do the right hand, correct?
I did do the right hand, yes.
Okay. And you exclude Clayton Foreman from the right hand, right? Clippings, right fingernail clippings.
It was a single source profile consistent with Mary Catherine Edwards.
Okay. And excluded, but you had someone else's DNA underneath there, did you not?
Under the left hand, not the right.
Under the left hand.
Correct.
Right. So there was right hand on here, left hand on what you did, which was a DNA profile,
Correct.
correct?
Correct.
That was stronger or had more of a sample than the anal swabs that you tested, right?
The quantity was higher.
Higher. Did you ever then try to ascertain who possibly DNA it was on the left-hand side that you had?
I can only make comparisons with the samples that are provided to me.
And you were never, and that's I guess the point I was trying to get at is you were only given two individuals, Edwards and Foreman, to compare.
That's correct.
But there's someone else's DNA profile from yours on the left side, right?
That is correct.
And in Selmart on the right side. If that's what defendant's 4 is, right?
Right.
Scrapings. And if there was testimony from a pathologist, scrapings, a sign of a struggle, that's usually where you probably would get scrapings from. Well, that's what they said. Possibility.
Possibility.
Okay. But you were never asked to test.
I was only asked to make comparisons with Mary Catherine Edwards and Clayton Foreman.
So in the anal box, you have another male DNA that you don't know how it got there. You threw it out that it might have been contaminated, but you're not saying that for certain.
Absolutely not.
Because if there was testimony of how careful everybody was and what they did, protocols, okay, but someone else's DNA is there. On the epiphilia of the swab, the vaginal swab, there's another DNA there, right?
There's indications of a male, yes.
Another male, okay? You have under the fingernail on the right side from Selmart in '97 that says he can't be excluded under the right fingernail clippings. And then when you tested the left fingernail clippings, there's unknown male DNA underneath those clippings, but you weren't asked to try to identify.
That's correct.
You did YSTR, the new thing.
Yes.
To me, it's new. What is the difference between regular STR that you did in this case and YSTR?
Regular STR testing looks at different locations along all of the autosomal chromosomes. You have 46 chromosomes total. Women have 2 X, men have an X and a Y. What YSTR testing does is it ignores everything but that Y chromosome. So in a situation where my testing shows me I have a high volume or a high quantity of female DNA, but a very low quantity of male DNA, the probability of being able to detect that male profile decreases significantly. With this additional testing, I am able to look at only markers, only locations along the Y chromosome, and it's able to ignore all the other DNA in a sample.
And you would agree that is like very, very broad. I mean, you're casting a net out to the world almost. You probably ask them, what's that question mean? You testified as to why yesterday. I'm going to call it why. Okay, STR. You said that when you do that, and say you take mine as an example, you may get my YSTR chromosome, right?
Mhm.
But you cannot exclude anybody on my side, male on my side of the family.
From a paternal lineage, that's correct.
That's right.
Mhm.
But that determination doesn't stop with just me. That goes back infinity.
Yes,
I mean, goes back to almost the beginning of time, that whoever may have been a descendant. I had heard one time that all Europeans had Charlemagne's possible DNA, the males. Agree?
I don't know.
Well, but if he was the single contributor back then, you know who Charlemagne was.
I do.
Yeah. But it could go back, if we're here in the United States and there's settlers from Nova Scotia to Louisiana, wherever, it could go over to Europe and you could get similar YSTR
Yes,
than what you got here from Mr. Foreman.
that is correct.
In fact, I think there's testimony from a genealogist. I don't know if you know Miss LaPointe, Sherry LaPointe.
I have met her, yes.
Some of her relatives were implicated in this. That's how they got to know her, from Louisiana, from Bunkie, Louisiana. So you're not saying that I mean, it's finite. It's a broad. This can go back. I mean, people you don't even know could be a relative of yours.
Oh, yes.
But it's just an indication, is it not, of, yeah, we think his DNA is there and there's some markers it says there, but the numbers are not the same as an STR test.
No, the numbers are not going to be the same.
Right. And similar people could have the similar markers that you picked up when you did the YSTR test.
Yes,
Agreed?
agreed.
Preparing, I came across this document. Was that generated by you, ma'am?
Yes, it was. Okay,
And that has to do with the YSTR, correct?
yes,
You stated, as in States Exhibit number 159, when you did the YSTR, it was basically down to 16,388
yes,
probability,
yes,
correct?
yes.
That's far from septillion or anywhere close to it, right?
It is smaller.
I mean, it's not even a, I don't even know what you call it, a dot.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so small,
It is smaller.
okay? But that's probably not a true number, correct? You even divide that down even further. In reference to probabilities, what's a haploid type?
A haplotype is simply the genetic information. It's the alleles that we see right now.
And in that allele, you saw some from African Americans, correct?
The database includes information from African Americans.
Right. Asian Americans,
Yes, they're included in the database.
Hispanic Americans,
Yes,
Native Americans.
yes,
It's basically trying to cover the whole gamut of the population, correct?
yes,
Also Caucasian.
yes.
Mr. Foreman, you think he's probably a Caucasian, the best guesstimate?
If I had to guess.
When you separate that out, knowing that he's a Caucasian, what does the percentage come down to? Instead of 16,000, what's the number it actually comes down to?
It says it's 3,625.
1 in 1,211.
If you reported a 95% upper confidence interval, that is what it is. That is not what we report.
Yeah, but you do the whole thing because all these together, African American, Asian Americans, Hispanics, Natives, and Caucasians make up that 16,000, correct?
Yes, correct.
But when you realize that you're naming this person, it drops down to 1,211. Because you know who it is. I mean, you see him, he's a Caucasian.
So there are actually 3,625 individuals, Caucasian individuals in the database. But again, if you report a 95% upper confidence interval, it is 1 in 1,211. Yes,
And not the 16,000.
that's correct.
That's a big number between well, it's a big number from septillion, whatever it is, 444 or 6.19 or 69 septillion. Now you've reduced it down drastically to 16,388. And realistically, it's only 1,211.
According to that database, yes, sir.
According to that you used.
Yeah.
So 1 in 1,211. And where did that sample come from, the YSTR?
That was from the anal, epithelial cell fraction of the anal swab, and also the sperm cell fraction of the anal swab. Both of those were one.
And again, the samples that you had there were less than what you had under the fingernails, the quantity to test, and you were never asked to test it. And I'm not getting on you, but you were never requested to try to find out whose DNA that was.
That's correct.
Did you realize that they had 30 plus maybe people that they were testing to try to eliminate?
But other possible suspects?
You don't have any idea about that. And in fact, as in defendants number 4, they actually named a person that could not be excluded back in 1997, correct?
I don't know.
That, if that's what it reports.
That's what they report.
There was a question in reference to a witness that said, well, the defense is only asking in reference to fingernails. We have vaginal swabs and anal swabs. And through your testimony, it depends on the quantity, but DNA is DNA. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
And you can get the same results whether or not it came from vaginal, fingernails, or the anal in this case, if depending on the quality.
Yes.
So when you look at something, you could pull the same information if you were requested to do it, but you could pull the same results from any of these samples, correct? Possibility.
Possibility.
Right. And the standard now that you used in your laboratory is 23,
Loci, locations.
no, Aaliyah.
We look at 23 locations and then there are alleles within those locations.
Okay. And on one of them, you only got 5. Any questions that you didn't understand? I tried to muddle through them.
No, you did great. Thank you.
I'm glad that's on the record. Anything you didn't understand, you want to correct? I tried to mislead you or anything, say, oh, wait a minute, I need to correct anything, any clarifications or anything that you know of?
No, sir, not that I know.
Okay. Thank you for your time. I passed the description. Wait.
So I'm gonna show you what's marked as a defense exhibit 4. If you could just kind of take a look at that, the type of testing and what specifically was being tested there.
Okay.
So what type of testing are we looking at in that Cellmark did back in 90 whatever?
This is DNA analysis done at the very early stages. Of DNA, it is DNA analysis, but it's very old, it's very outdated. And it's not very discriminating also.
What do you mean by that?
There's not a lot of information, and there's a lot of potential for overlap. The same common alleles, you see the same common alleles at the locations that are looked at. But it is DNA analysis.
Is one of the types of analysis performed what we used to refer to as DQ alpha?
Yes.
What is that?
That is one of the precursors, one of the beginnings of DNA analysis, where they were looking at just certain areas of the DNA. But again, there wasn't a lot of discriminatory power for DQ alpha, which is one of the reasons why we progressed to where we are.
So this is not really what we're looking at here in defense 4 is not really a STR testing where you're comparing all these loci and the alleles at those loci.
Yeah, this is not STR testing. This is not what we do today.
Okay. That being said, well, okay, so, and you say it's not very discriminating. Does that mean that it's more difficult, based on the limited types of testing that were available at that time to have inclusions or exclusions when you're comparing profiles that are developed?
In my opinion, yes.
So does it surprise you at all that there's an exclusion referencing a specific fingernail for an individual by the name of Sandy Salem, based on what you see here?
I don't have a lot of training, well, I don't have much training at all in this. This is even before my time. So I don't want to speak too much of being comfortable with the inclusions or exclusions. I just know that this type of analysis had a lot of limitations.
Is this type of analysis really used at all in your field in the current practice?
No, it is not.
And that being said, that report right there did not reference Sandy Sandlin being excluded from the sperm cell fractions of the vaginal swab.
I'd have to look at it again.
Oh, actually, this is the correct report. There were a number of cell mark reports, but if you're looking at the conclusions of this paragraph on page 2 of defense exhibit 4,
Yes.
does it appear just from the writing on that page that Sandy Sandlin was in this particular report noted as excluded from the sperm cell fraction of the vaginal swab?
It says if it's from a single sperm donor, he is. If the remaining types originated from 2 or more sperm donors, they cannot be excluded.
Now, when you took this vaginal swab later in your testing, did you find ultimately a profile that was 2 contributors?
Yes,
One being of a sperm donor and one being what was ultimately discerned as Catherine Edwards.
one was Mary Catherine Edwards and one was an unknown male.
Right. And the unknown male being the assumed sperm donor.
Yes,
Okay, so Sandy Sandlin was excluded based on what you just read there. Now, you don't know anything about the actual testing, but just what was written on that paper in defense 4, does it appear he was excluded from the vaginal sperm cell?
it said if there was 1 sperm donor, he was. If there were 2 sperm donors, he was not.
Okay. Now, also, I wanted to ask you about. First of all, I want to clear a couple things up from what was asked of you earlier. The jury saw 4 of your DNA reports, your original DNA report, 2 supplements, and then your DNA Y-star report yesterday, correct?
That's correct.
Now, there was some other reports that you were asked about by Mr. Burbank. I want to make sure that they understand. When you receive items of evidence, do you also do a biology report before you do a DNA report?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so you have a biology report for each item or each group of items that you receive, then you have a DNA report.
That's correct.
Does the DNA report reflect your ultimate findings for those particular items of evidence?
My DNA report reflects the DNA work that was done and any comparisons that were made.
Okay. Now, one question that was asked of you is about the anal swab box. We talked yesterday about this, and I asked you if you thought, when you found that there was no sample remaining in that box, if you thought this was kind of a long shot.
You did.
And show you. Pull it up. So the portions of these swabs that remain, these are just the sticks, right?
Yes.
And these are broken off on the swab end. Okay, so this right here is the part that someone has to touch, correct? When they're performing the swab, when they're handling it, or anything in between.
Yes.
And were the procedures and practices used? You've worked cold cases with me before. Were the practices used in the 90s as strict as they are now, as far as preventing, wearing protective equipment, gloves, masks, preventing any potential sources of contamination?
No, they were not.
Now, you were asked about contamination. So if I've contaminated that swab stick right here today, haven't I?
You have.
I've touched it a number of times. That is one potential source of contamination, a foreign profile that has touched that item without any protective glove or equipment.
Yes,
Same with if anybody else had touched that, this projector right here, could that potentially be a contaminant for that swab stick if I had set it directly on it?
potentially.
There's a number of different ways that those types of foreign profiles can be on an item of evidence such as this.
That's correct.
Now, that being said, this is all that you had to go on, correct?
That's right.
At the time, at least.
Yes,
And so you swabbed it and tried to discern whether or not there were any profiles that could be interpreted from the inside of this box and these broken off swab sticks.
yes.
And was it surprising that you did not have a profile that could result in an inclusion of Clayton Foreman?
Whenever I do DNA analysis, I don't have any expectations one way or the other. It wasn't surprising to me to find kind of some inconsistencies because I went into it without any expectations, not knowing what I might find and knowing that this was a long shot.
And so you ultimately there's a mixture of two individuals that you found from the swab of these items here, 33A and its contents.
That's correct.
One of them being assumed Catherine Edwards,
That's correct.
and the other being an unknown foreign male contributor.
That's correct.
Okay. Any person, potentially, if you swab these again right now, you would have two unknown foreign male contributors because I've touched.
That's possible.
At any point in the 20 to 30 years that these items of evidence traveled around to the locations they were tested, is it within the realm of possibility that someone's foreign DNA ended up on these parts of the swab sticks?
That's possible.
Again, these are the parts that you have to touch in order to take the swabs and do anything with them.
Yes.
So when you received the last remaining portion of the anal swab, the original anal swab, meaning the other end of that stick, was that more likely to be a biological source that would produce a profile that you would be able to interpret both contributors to it?
I felt like that was going to be a better representation of the genetic material from the victim's anal area at the time of collection than sticks in a box.
And the profile that you did ultimately develop from those sticks in a box, it is weaker for Clayton Foreman, correct?
From the sticks in the box?
I'm sorry, from the last remaining portion of the anal swab.
The likelihood ratio is less than for some of the other samples.
Now, we talked yesterday about why that might be the case. What are some reasons that you would have such a very strong profile for the sperm cell fraction of the vaginal swab, but then a much weaker profile for the sperm cell fraction of the anal swab?
The bottom line is there is just less DNA from that foreign contributor on that sample than some of the other samples. Some reasons for that could simply be that ejaculation did not occur in that area. The DNA that's being detected is drainage. Ejaculation may have occurred in the vaginal area, and there's just drainage onto the anal area. It could be that it was simply just an assault without the ejaculation. There's a lot of reasons. Those are a few.
And would it Would it affect anything that you've explained to us if the pathologist who took this swab said that it was a interior rectal swab, meaning it was not the exterior surface of the anus, but inside the rectum?
No,
Okay, so possible conclusions or possible explanations for why that profile would be weaker for the sperm cell fraction of the anal swab compared to the sperm cell fraction of the vaginal swab are: one, that there was an ejaculation in the vagina, but not in the anal.
yes,
Or two, that there was some form of drainage, meaning that the victim would have been on her back at some point.
I'm not sure of the actual position, but just the way gravity works, there's possibility of drainage into that area.
When we're not physically there or have someone to explain what happened, we can't really exclude any possible, reason why it might have been that way.
That's exactly right.
Okay. So now let me ask you too about the fingernails. If when Catherine Edwards was raped and murdered by Clayton Foreman, her hands were bound by handcuffs, would that be an explanation for why you did not find any DNA attributable to Clayton Foreman underneath either of her fingernails?
Yes,
Where, in your experience, does most DNA under a victim's fingernails, what is the situation in which that DNA gets there?
there must be some sort of physical contact.
Meaning defensive, fighting or, defensive actions from the victim against their assailant.
That can be one reason.
And would a victim who has been handcuffed and bound be able to take any defensive measures?
No,
Or at least with their hands?
right.
Would a victim who was held under threat or duress by a weapon, would that be a possible explanation for how there would be no DNA attributable to Clayton Foreman underneath Catherine Edwards' fingerprint nails?
That is one possible explanation.
Okay. Now I want to make sure that I understand exactly what you were looking at here. I'm going to show you again defense 5. Okay, so we got the whole picture now. Defense 5. What is this?
That is my StarMix report for the anal sperm cell fraction.
Okay, so you told us yesterday that StarMix is the computer analytics program that is utilized in your lab to help discern which alleles in a particular loci are attributable to one contributor or the other.
That's correct.
You used to do this manually,
That's correct.
but StarMix is the basically the same manual inputs on an analytical and data-driven scale.
That's correct.
Okay, so you were being asked about, now this is the sperm cell, this is the StarMix report, defense 5, for the sperm cell fraction of the anal swab, correct?
That is correct.
Of all the profiles where there was a contributor that evidence was supporting that contributor being Clayton Foreman, is this the weakest of the profiles, the sperm cell fraction of the anal swab?
It is the smallest likelihood ratio of all of them, yes.
Okay, so you were being asked about this right here, right? This chart.
Yes.
What does this chart represent?
That chart represents the determination of what allelic information came from contributor 1, which I told the software. Contributor 1 is going to be Mary Catherine Edwards. Contributor 1 is going to have these alleles. And it then did the math to determine what were the possible allelic combinations for contributor 2, and that's what's in that other column.
Okay, and so why does it say summary greater than or equal to 99%?
In that chart, Star Mix will only put the combinations it's absolutely confident about. It has a 99% or greater confidence that those alleles are from that contributor.
So meaning these contributor one, that is what you have input as Catherine Edwards.
Yes,
And each one of these, so like 7,9.3, does that represent two peaks or two alleles at that particular location, TH01?
yes,
And are each one of those alleles in that column for contributor one, are those essentially what we're calling the profile for Catherine Edwards?
yes.
Okay, now on contributor two, you have a number of zeros. Why are there zeros here on this particular chart, on this particular table?
That means that there either was not genetic information from the second contributor, or the software was not 99% or greater confident that whatever allelic information is there is from contributor number 2.
So for those items on, or for those locations or loci on this chart where there is an allele data for contributor 2, do those represent the points where the calculations are 99% or greater confident that those alleles are attributed to the second contributor?
Yes,
And how many are there in total that are of that confidence level or higher? 5?
5.
Okay. And based on those 5 that you have that 99% or greater confidence level, were you able to develop a profile that could be compared for DNA analysis?
Yes,
But is that essentially, when we're talking about weaker profiles, is that kind of what we're talking about? There are some where there isn't that confidence level.
yes,
And if you looked at, say, for example, the sperm cell fraction of the vaginal swab, would it likely represent a number of higher confidence levels at a number, all of the different locations or loci?
there would be more information in the column for contributor 2.
But that being said, on these locations where there are a 0, does that necessarily mean that you did not have DNA inputs at those loci?
No,
Okay, so you do have some. For example, if you go back to page 8 of that chart and you look at the contributor number 2, it basically gives you each of the genotypes that were potentially located at that allele, TH01, and it gives you the probabilities. It weights them based on everything that has been input and that it has received concerning this analysis.
that's correct.
And is that how you get to whether or not you can make a determination that it is of this confidence level or higher?
Yes,
And you do this in every single analysis that you do.
when there's a comparison, yes.
And in those comparisons where you have likelihood ratios into the septillions, are those 99% confidence levels, there's a lot more data there that you rely on.
Yes,
So if we go down to TPOX, is that one of the alleles where there was a 99% or greater confidence level?
yes,
Same thing with D1S1.
yes.
Is that okay? So is there anything about Defense Exhibit 5 that changes your opinions that you talked about in all 4 of these reports?
No,
And that was for the Defense 5. That's the sperm cell fraction of the anal swab.
it is.
Now you were also asked about Defense 6 and 7. What are these?
Those are the reports for my quantification results for different samples that were run.
And you were asked about the amount of DNA that you were able to extract for certain items in your quantification results, right?
Correct.
Does the amount of DNA that you're able to extract have an effect on what type of profile or whether or not you can develop profiles that can be compared?
Yes,
But if it is a single source, like, for example, one of the fingernails, does it, if it's single source, it's single source, right?
yes,
You can have a little bit of DNA or a lot of DNA, and it's still of the same source.
it's still single source,
Right. And that single source was Catherine Edwards on at least one of them.
one of them, yes.
You were also asked about the lesser likelihood ratios for the epithelial cell fractions of the vaginal swabs, correct? Compared to the sperm cell fractions.
The epithelial cell fraction did not have a likelihood ratio. It was single source, Mary Catherine Edwards, with indications of a male contributor at the M1 locus.
I see. And then you're basing that on the your reporting for the April 30th, 2021 report?
And there's also the August 31st, 2021.
Okay, so again, and then in the comforter, there's a sperm cell fraction and an epithelial cell fraction that have different likelihood ratios as well.
Yes,
Again, is it consistent with what you would expect in a case involving a sexual assault where there is sperm found on these items, that the sperm cell fraction of both the comforter and the vaginal swab would have a much stronger profile that can be attributed to Clayton Foreman and under that likelihood ratio?
can you rephrase that question, please?
Meaning that the sperm cell fraction, whether it's from the comforter or the swab, is it surprising at all that it is a stronger profile
Then what?
than the epithelium, the non-sperm cell?
No, that is not surprising.
Okay. If it were the opposite, if the epithelial had a stronger likelihood ratio for Clayton Foreman, would that be something that you would potentially see a red flag in that?
If it was substantially different, I might want to take a look at the process and see if something went wrong.
Okay. Would, but I was missing a report. So let me ask you again. Once you had the notes, I mean, you had Clayton Foreman's buccal swabs, and you had Catherine Edwards' blood, and you prepared blood cards or blood standards for each of those. Did you issue the report for August of 2021?
I did.
And yeah. And in that report, what was your finding concerning the DNA extract from the sperm cell fraction of the comforter cutting from the scene?
The previously obtained DNA profile from this item is interpreted as a mixture of two individuals with Mary Catherine Edwards as an assumed contributor. The probability of obtaining this mixture profile, if the DNA came from Mary Catherine Edwards and Clayton Foreman, is 444 septillion times greater than the probability of obtaining this profile if the DNA came from Mary Catherine Edwards and one unrelated unknown individual. This likelihood ratio indicates support for the proposition that Clayton Foreman is a possible contributor to the profile.
So the chances that this profile, the two contributors to that profile are Clayton Foreman and Catherine Edwards, is 444 septillion times greater than the chances that that profile, the contributors to that profile, are two unknown individuals.
It's from Mary Catherine Edwards and one unknown individual.
I see. Okay, so now that you have her known, you're able to, she's included as part of the other side of that ratio or that comparison. Okay. And even in the extract of the epithelial cell fraction of the comforter, which you would expect to have a lower profile or weaker profile. What was your conclusion there?
The previously obtained DNA profile from this item is interpreted as a mixture of two individuals with Mary Catherine Edwards as an assumed contributor. The probability of obtaining this mixture profile, if the DNA came from Mary Catherine Edwards and Clayton Foreman, is 61.1 septillion times greater than the probability of obtaining this profile if the DNA came from Mary Catherine Edwards and one unrelated unknown individual. This likelihood ratio indicates support for the proposition that Clayton Foreman is a possible contributor to the profile.
So again, the probability that the contributor to that item, the epithelial cell fraction of the comforter, that the contributors are Clayton Foreman and Catherine Edwards, is 61.1 septillion times greater than it is that's Catherine Edwards and some unknown male.
Yes.
And what about the extract from the sperm cell fraction of the vaginal swabs of Mary Catherine Edwards?
The previously obtained DNA profile from this item is interpreted as a mixture of two individuals with Mary Catherine Edwards as an assumed contributor. The probability of obtaining this mixture profile, if the DNA came from Mary Catherine Edwards and Clayton Foreman, is 461 septillion times greater than the probability of obtaining this profile if the DNA came from Mary Catherine Edwards and one unrelated unknown individual. This likelihood ratio indicates support for the proposition that Clayton Foreman is a possible contributor to the profile.
So again, the probability that the contributors to the sperm cell fraction of the vaginal swab, that those two contributors are Catherine Edwards and Clayton Foreman, is 461 septillion times greater than the probability that contributors would be Catherine Edwards and some unknown male.
Unknown individual, yes.
Okay. And then the extract from the epithelial cell fraction of the vaginal swabs was single source, was it not?
So it was reported as single source. However, there is indication of at least one male contributor at the amylogenin locus. So again, we saw that Y, a little blip of that Y, but there was not enough, there was nothing else called in the profile, and there was nothing that comparisons could be done on.
So it is very faint. Is that an accurate way of describing that?
Yes.
Blip? And would it matter how many known samples I brought you to compare to that blip? Would you be able to make a comparison based on the profile that you had developed?
No.
Would you agree that from the comforter cutting and the vaginal swabs, there's scientific evidence to support the conclusion that Clayton Foreman is a contributor or a possible contributor to those items, to the sperm cell fraction and epithelial, or to those items?
There is scientific evidence that the profile can be explained as having come from Clayton Foreman and Mary Catherine Edwards versus Mary Catherine Edwards and an unknown individual.
Thank you.
Do you have some more? I think we're going to have to take a break. Drew's been here an hour and 45 minutes. Let's take a break, please. All right, all parties are present and we are ready to proceed. Please bring the jury in. Thank you.
So.
So where you headed next?
Back to the lab.
Oh, back to the lab.
We'll probably lunch and back.
Is it still over on 290 or do
Yes.
you move? And 610, 290?
Oh, no, we're 290 West Road now, little, west.
Oh.
And the jury is seated in the courtroom, and Mr. Burbank, you may do some cross-examination.
Ms. Dean, there was a lot of questions now asked by the state, and I'm going to be as brief as I can. You did STR, and that's probably ideally what the test you want to have is an STR test, correct?
It is.
Because it gives, and I'm not talking about your results in the Amelia in reference to when I said you only had 5, because you only took 5, it indicates something, but 5 out of the 23 that you said that you use now, right? I mean, it would be good if you had the left-hand side of that marker or the column with all the lists and all the numbers there. But when you did the sample on contributor number 2, you only picked 5 out of the 23. And that's the point I was trying to get at. You understand?
I do.
Okay. And the other thing is that when STR wasn't, I guess, discovering somebody or a result that you were trying to get, like in, and this is States 57, where you had an unknown contributor, a male contributor, you could have possibly gone to a YSTR and tried to find it, but you didn't.
That's correct.
Okay, it could have, just like you did with whatever it was on something that was a little fraction of something, you went to YSTR, correct?
That's correct.
That came out to 1,211 instead of the 16,000 because he's Caucasian,
That's correct.
right? So, but you didn't do it. And,
Was that a question?
yeah, but you didn't do it, correct?
I did
That's
not.
correct, right,
That's correct.
okay. And it's the same with, I want to talk a little bit about the handcuffs and the scrapings. Okay? Now you've testified that if the person was handcuffed, there probably wasn't a struggle in order for the scrapings. Isn't that what you testified to? Possibility?
A possibility.
Right, from the state's questioning, right?
Yeah.
Well, there had to be something happening or something happened. If it didn't happen with Foreman, supposedly whenever it's supposed to have happened, then something happened prior to that date because we know there's a known person under one hand from Selmart testified to defense number 4, correct? Oh, well, let me take a step back. Hold on a minute, because defense number 4, when you're asked questions, you were asked about a Sandy Sandler, right?
Yes.
Did I ever mention Sandy Sandelin in my questioning to you?
I don't believe so.
No. What I was looking at was Glenn C. Hansen cannot be excluded as a source of DNA obtained on the right-hand clippings.
That's correct. That's what that report said.
Now, my follow-up question though is that what they want to tell you and your question is that the state asked you is, this isn't good anymore, is it? Well, it is good, isn't it?
I would say it's an accurate representation of the analysis that they did at that time. Yes, absolutely.
And back in that time, would you agree with me, in 1997, when this report was done, Cellmark was bringing representatives there in a court of law to testify to their results in DNA, correct?
I don't know if they were or not.
Well, if they said, or their testimony, would you expect that, strike that. Did you ever know that Cellmark ever has been part of court proceedings?
Yes, they have been.
Yes. And so back in 97, you would anticipate that they would have testified as to the standards then, right?
I would,
Right.
yes, I would anticipate that.
And one of the questions that I asked you was that since 97, 87, when this basically really started, technology has gotten better, right?
It has.
And when we go back our next 20 years, if we're in court again, it's going to be better than it was today,
Yes,
right? But it was good enough for analysis and court proceedings back in 97, but it may be a little bit more refined now, correct?
that's correct.
But this is a good DNA sample, not of Sandlin, correct? It says that Glenn Hansen can't be excluded. Right?
That is
Right
correct.
hand clippings.
That is what the report says. Yes, sir.
So we know that there's a DNA profile that they can't exclude on the right finger or nails, right?
That's right.
And you've got a DNA profile on the left nail clippings.
That I do. Yes.
And if you had the DNA profile from the right hand and the left hand, could you have done YSTR?
Yes,
But you didn't.
I did not.
And that's a broader net of let's see what male or whoever in this world can be related to. And in this case, trying to get back to either him or somebody else. That's Mr. Foreman.
Yes,
But it wasn't done.
it was not done.
And to come up here and you're not insinuating this wasn't good science, and this is defendants number 4 from Cellmark.
No, I'm not saying that.
No, you're not saying that.
No,
And
sir.
that result was probably good, that you probably rely upon it, though there are better refined tests now.
Yes,
But back then in 97, this was the go-to.
yes.
And still, after all this now, in reference to the handcuffs. So somewhere there, you said there has to be a struggle to get the scrapings underneath the nails usually. Would you agree?
No,
Well,
I said there needed to be some sort of physical contact.
okay. Well, if, we talked about what the pathologist said about a struggle. You talked to the state in reference to handcuffs and whether struggling trying to get handcuffs on, whether or not they could or not. And you said, no, maybe not. Correct?
I don't think they asked about what would happen trying to put handcuffs on. They asked how, if she was handcuffed, would that explain why maybe a struggle could not have happened, or maybe why DNA did not get under her fingernails?
Well, we know that that's not true.
Okay,
Well, you weren't here for the other testimony. There's testimony, there was a struggle. And now you know there's somebody's male DNA underneath the right hand and the left hand nail clippings.
my analysis shows underneath the left foot.
Right. And Cellmark says there's somebody under the right.
That is what that report says, yes,
Okay.
sir.
So if somebody said, you may not agree with the struggle possibility, and there's something there to test. And that's all I'm asking. Just like the anal swabs, with the other male, you could have done YSTR to try to determine who it was.
Yes,
Because bottom line to this is, you can't tell me when, where, and how any of these specimens or anything was put there.
no, I cannot.
And who the other contributors or other male DNAs throughout this whole report, who they are, and could they be excluded or not, because you were never asked to test those.
That's correct.
Now, is there any clarification more that you might need or anything that confused or? So I asked that and there were a ton more questions.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Pass the witness.
Anything else from this lady? No, sir. All right, you are excused. Thank you. Next, please.
So
Do
time.
you have anything else
Not for
before
the
you
hearing.
want this other matter heard by the
Yes.
court? All right. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, here's what we're going to do. We're going to break until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The court has to take up some legal matters this afternoon, which is not unusual in a case. And it's going to take this afternoon to do it. So I want you to be mindful of the instructions the court has given to you, and especially don't watch news or listen or read about news reports that may be discussing these matters. Remember, I know you're sensitive about that. Please be mindful. And we will see you back at 9 o'clock. One other thing, from what I've been told, we are in the last 2 or 3 witnesses for the presentation of the state's case. So you can give you an idea. We're coming to a conclusion in this phase of the trial. So please have a nice evening and afternoon and evening, and we will see you back at 9 o'clock. Thank you. Everyone else remains seated while the jury exits first.